Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Five Star Zone. Rico Beard with Harold Shelton, Senior Research Manager from the Big Ten Network. So that means he's going to give us all the facts that we need in this pod. Harold, and man, I'm glad to have you, man. Normally we see you in hoop season, but now we get you for football season. So we're not going to do the Big Ten Hoops media breakdown. That's going on. But no, we're talking some football and some things going on in the Big Ten. So, Harold, welcome to the pod, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. Like you said, normally we get together February, March, but I'm glad we're doing this in October and hopefully through the rest of the year.
Yeah, brother. Hey, let's just jump right into this. Friday night, Michigan State travels to Oregon, Austin Stadium. The Oregon Ducks. It took a while, but now it looks like that team that Dan Lanning has this thing humming. Michigan State struggling. They played Ohio State, and then, hey, congratulations. 6 days later, you get to make the trip to the West Coast to go play another top 5 team in Oregon. I mean, give us a preview of this game. If you're a Spartan fan, is there a chance that you could pull this thing off, or is it just too much, too fast in 6 days?
Yeah, the schedule maker surely didn't do them any favors, right? I mean, you play the two best teams in the league, 6 days apart, cross country travel. Go from a Saturday night game to a Friday night game. They certainly didn't give them any favors. I do think that Ohio State is better than Oregon, so I don't know if they'll see the same level of play all around that they did last Saturday. And I thought there were plays that were made that were good, but again, turnovers were a huge issue as they've been all year. As we saw in that second quarter, Aiden Childs was firing. Like he made good shots to Jerron Glover, Nick Marsh, great sideline shot. They were able to run the ball a little bit. Carter had that 20-yard run, but it seemed like every time they tried to get close, it was Jack Velling fumble or it was the turnover on downs. I mean, their first 4 drives all ended up at the Ohio State red zone and they only scored once. And so if you do that against a team like Oregon, you're going to go ahead and score on the other end. We talked about them kind of starting slow, but they seem to figure it out now. The last couple games against Oregon State and UCLA, I know those aren't the best type of teams, but we've seen them really, really turn it on. And if Michigan State can't get pressure like they did against Ohio State, no, then I think it could be a long night because Dylan Gabriel was pressured a bunch those first 2 games. It was 7 sacks. They had allowed like 5 all of last year. So you're like, oh, maybe this offensive line's got some problems. And if that's the case, then maybe the Michigan State pass rush can get to him. But he's only been pressured 6 times in the last 2 weeks. And as we saw the other night, they didn't really get after Will Howard much at all. They didn't sack him once. Only 3 tackles for loss.
See, here's the thing, though. I wonder because I almost look at that Michigan State Ohio State game as 2 separate games. Early in the game, when it was before they made all the turnovers, they were battling. And I think once Ohio State got that big lead right at the third quarter, at that point they knew, okay, MSU is going to have to bring the pressure. So it was almost like, we know what you're going to do. There's no deviance of what you're trying to do. You can't mask anything. You got to bring pressure to us. So we're going to do, like some max protect. We're going to make sure you don't get to the quarterback. But especially like I look at that first drive when Ohio State goes down and they just end up with 3 points and you're like, oh, they had a penalty against them. It's like, okay, maybe you could do something. I guess if the Spartans can keep it close, I do think that maybe, as you say, you could incorporate, because MSU has, one of the top teams in tackling for losses. But yeah, if it's just, yep, we already know what you got to do. You're desperate. You're going to come after us. We're just going to play against your aggressiveness.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it too is they've had a hard time getting home with just 3 or 4 guys. It seems like they always have to blitz 1 or 2 different guys that have 5 or 6 getting there. And against Oregon, that's tough because they got receivers, tight ends all over the place. Those dudes are in space. They catch it for 10 and it's going for 70. So that's one of those where you kind of have to pick your poison, because Dylan Gabriel, if you give him time and sit back there, he's been the most accurate quarterback in the country. 75% minimum in all 4 games he's played. So it's like, do you sit back and try to, tackle him before the first down line? or do you try to send pressure, but then you're one-on-one outside? If it's a Charles Brantley, Angelo Gross on a Evan Stewart or Tez Johnson, like
Well,
that
that's
could
not
be
gonna
a
work.
house call. Right.
Yeah, that's not
Exactly.
gonna work.
Right.
But now here's the other thing that I guess if you're MSU and you're Joe Rossi, the defensive coordinator, I did see against Ohio State. They really didn't send that same amount of aggression that they sent in the other game, the first 4 games. Even the Boston College game that they lost, they bottled up the QB because they brought the pressure. For Ohio State, it was more death by 1,000 knife cuts, where, okay, we're not going to give up the big play, but by doing that, we're not going to really be overly aggressive as well. Do you see the same strategy with Dillon Gabriel and this Oregon offense?
I think you have to pick an option there. I think they tried to do a bit of both, where it's like, all right, well, if we just try to keep things in front of us, eventually we can get them off the field. A team like Ohio State, that's not going to work. Like, it's just not. And so, I think Oregon is in that similar area code, maybe not as good as Ohio State, but again, a ton of weapons. I don't know if their offensive line is as good as Ohio State, so I would at least try to get pressure on Gabriel, maybe at least force him out of the pocket. He's a much smaller quarterback than Will Howard, so maybe if you hit him a few times, he gets rattled. I would certainly try that if I'm Joe Rossi, but again, I'm just a dude watching TV.
Now it's funny because, and I'm talking with Harold Sheldon from the Big Ten Network. Harold, when I look at some of the stats, now this is why I'm going to lean more towards you, but I did see something that I thought maybe was a little glaring. Maybe the key to this game for MSU and pulling off an upset is not necessarily Aiden Childs, but more of the running back tandem of Nate Carter and Lynch Adams, because Oregon, their rush defense is not stellar. If you could establish a run game against them, that's maybe the chink in the armor that they have.
No, I would agree with that. And then we saw it in week 2. Ashton Genty, went over 200 against them. Now, granted, he might be the best running back in the country,
Correct.
But he had a big day. And, Oregon State had some success when that game was close, being able to run the ball. So I think the big thing for them is they can't afford to get down 14-0, 21-0 early where they can't run the ball. And then it becomes a pass rush drill and everything has to rely on Aiden Childs. And then, you got all of the injuries up front. So you got 270-pound left tackles playing out there and all that. And that's when the thing can really snowball. But I agree. And I thought early on, like you said, they were able to run the ball pretty well. Like the first play, Nate Carter, 20-yard run. Lynch Adams was making plays in space. And you're like, okay, here we go. Like they found some kind of balance. It seemed like Ohio State didn't really know what was coming those first couple of drives. But I think once that lead built and they became one-dimensional, that's when they got out of hand. So I agree. If they can establish a line of scrimmage and, make it so Childs doesn't have to do everything, I think they have a pretty good shot.
And, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball because you brought it up. MSU going with some true freshmen on the offensive line. Going up against Ohio State is probably not the most ideal situation that you want to bring them in. If you anything, you want to do it against Prairie View. No disrespect to Prairie View, but it's a different caliber of talent. Hell, they kind of held their own in that game where you didn't see just, oh my God, wow, this guy is killing the quarterback. You forgot that they were out there and you didn't realize it, which to me if you're an offensive lineman, that's the biggest compliment when people forget that you're out there because you're not getting the holding calls. You're not getting the penalty. That's one thing that Jonathan Smith has actually curtailed was all the penalties. And you figure with brand new linemen out there against Ohio State, there's going to be a lot of holding calls. You didn't see that.
No, I agree. And I think there was the one play where Rakeem Johnson got put on skates in the second half. But other than that, I thought they held their own. And we saw, he was a true freshman out there. Rustin Young was a true freshman and got a lot of time. So, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, you don't want those guys to be out there, but they have to be because of all of the injuries and the depth that you lost in the portal. But for the future, if those guys are getting the reps now against the Ohio States and the Oregons of the world, that would certainly help them for 25 and 26.
Yeah, everything else is just going to be easy. Like, I'm not low going up against NFL type players.
Right. Exactly. Like Michigan's got a few, obviously. So, when they play them in a few weeks, like that'll be another challenge. But like you get through those, like nothing, I mean, you're not gonna see anything tougher than that.
Well, okay, it's funny you mentioned that. You mentioned Michigan. Michigan is number 10 team in the nation, but I don't necessarily know if they've looked like the number 10 team in the nation. They, Texas came in, did what they did, but then they played against USC and they were able to win that game. It's funny because basically they've taken the script from Penn State last year and they're just going to keep wash, rinse, repeat. We're going to keep doing this. We're going to run the ball, play defense. Please don't make us ask to throw the ball. Is that sustainable if you're trying to win the Big Ten, trying to make it to the college football playoffs?
To win the Big Ten, no. I think to win 8 or 9 games, possibly. It's funny you mentioned that because when Davis Warren was the starter, they were more run heavy, but not nearly like this. They were about 54% run, 46% pass. They tried to have some balance. With Orji being the starter, they run at 72% of the time. So you're getting up there with, Service Academy, Army, Air Force, Navy, teams that run it, 75% of the time. Like that's what Michigan is starting to look like. And they haven't been in a situation where they've been down double digits and have had to rally back. And, luckily for them against USC, they were up most of that game. And even when they did trail late, it was only, 4 points, 3 points. So they were able to still rely on the run game and get down and get the touchdown at the end. And with Minnesota, they had the big lead through special teams and defense. So again, they weren't forced to throw the ball. It would have been interesting if Minnesota would have recovered that onside kick, or well, they did recover. But if it wasn't overruled,
we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, if it wasn't overruled and Minnesota goes down and score with Orji had been able to lead them back, that would have been interesting to see. But yeah, if they could just stay with their one possession, they can rely on this run game because. As we've seen, Khalil Mullings is a hammer. The last 3 games, he's been the top 3 running back in the country in terms of yards, and he's always falling forward. So, I think it's a formula that works against teams that you have equal talent or better talent than. But if you're trying to beat Oregon and Ohio State, I have a hard time seeing that.
Yeah, because the way I look at it, I don't know if you're going to always get a defensive, pick six or
block punt.
Right. Your special team sets you up because once they get in the red zone, they're probably the most dangerous team in the Big Ten, probably outside of Oregon, where they're going to score. You're not going to stop them. I mean, they will just go for it 4 times and just ram it down your throat. But it's outside of the red zone is where they have problems. I mean, going back to USC, where it was basically 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out to that very last drive. I, like you, am wondering what happens when they fall down by double digits. Will Sharon Moore just look at Orji and say, all right, kid, you got to go out there and show me what you can do with your arm? Or do they just say, yeah, we're going to just keep, riding the legs of Khalil Mullings and see how far this kid can take us?
Yeah. And again, I'm very interested to see what's going to happen there. I wonder if we'll see it Saturday against Washington. Even though they've got 2 losses, they're favored in this game, which is
okay. Stop. How is the number 10 team in the country an underdog to a 2-loss Washington? Who, okay, they probably should have won last week if old boy don't run out on the field. He got a little too excited.
Yeah,
we get that, son. Okay. There's appeal for that, okay?
Right.
But how are you underdogs to Washington? How is this?
And I think Michigan started as a 1-point favorite, and it moved all the way up to like 2.5 to 3 now. I think in terms of metrics, I think Washington probably should be 5-0. Even the Washington State game that they lost, they had a 4th and goal to 2, decided to run it to the short side with no other option there. But you go down there and score, and you win that game. And clearly they outgained Rutgers by 200-something yards with penalties, like you mentioned, with the guy running on the field after the blocked field goal and stuff like that. Like they could easily be 5-0. So I wonder if that's playing part of it too. Like they don't really care as much about what you're ranked in the AP poll. They care about how you look on the field and what you've done. And we've seen Michigan basically become one-dimensional and have a couple of escapes at home. as opposed to, them dominating teams like some others have in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this Michigan team and I don't know what to think about it. I'm like, okay, is this just what they're going to be? Is this the new style? I mean, like you said, is it going to be Michigan football is almost service academy like football, or is this year a one-off because we didn't really go after a transfer portal QB, and now we're kind of paying the cost for this.
Yeah, I feel like this is a 1-year thing. Just kind of do what you have to do to win as many games as possible to try to get back in the playoff. But, I think having Colston Loveland back last week certainly helped, and maybe they just try to lean on that more. But they definitely don't seem to have, the receivers that they've had in the past. There's no Roman Wilson, there's no Cornelius Johnson, guys like that. Tyler Morris is fine, but he's not those two guys, and so it's a lot of Colston Loveland. And I thought it was interesting the last 2 games. Like if you talk about just throws in the air, like 5 yards downfield, just 5. Like how many do you think Orangey's had in the last 2 games?
5 yards, and
just 5 yards in the air downfield.
10,
16. How many completed?
8,
6.
Okay. Wow.
So again, we're talking just 5 yards downfield, and he's not even completing 50% of those.
6 for 16.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Bring you on for that. Those right there, right there. Wow,
that's a problem.
I mean, the funny thing is I don't understand why it takes teams the second half to realize they're not going to throw the ball.
Right.
Like USC played different coverage, and Michigan was able to run the first half. Minnesota, like in the second half, they realized, Coach, I don't think they're going to pass the ball on us today.
Right.
How about we just bring extra people in the box? We just need to shut down that running back, and we can win this thing. And it's almost happened 2 weeks in a row. I wonder if Washington takes a play out of that, or if Washington does the same thing where they think, oh, okay, they got this trick play. And I'm thinking to myself, there is no trick play. His trick play is making a 7-yard completion. That's a trick play to them.
Yeah, exactly. But, as we saw last week, Washington had trouble stopping the run. We saw Kyle Monangai, Samuel Brown, they both combined for about 180 or so. So, if Michigan's looking at that, they're like, oh, well, Rutgers was able to run the ball pretty well without much of a pass threat. Like maybe we could do the same thing. That's our DNA. And let's see if we could do it again.
It'll be interesting. Now, teams from the East crossing the Mississippi don't have a great regular season record. I'm not a research person, but I can tell you, I don't know what happens once your plane crosses over the Mississippi, but outside of bowl games, teams from the Big Ten that they had to go play on the West Coast, it normally ends up being an L. I said that this game was going to be something at the beginning of the year, and people thought I was crazy. And it was simply because of that fact. But now, looks like I got Vegas backing me up on this. All right, Harold, here's the thing. Is Ohio State just simply better than everybody else in this conference?
I think so as of right now. I did think Michigan State kind of, I won't say exposed some things, but there were some things there that you didn't see in the previous games. You were like, okay, well, like they aren't getting the pressure that they normally get. You would think with guys like Sawyer and JT, who have been there for multiple years, that they would just be, creating all of this havoc. And we haven't seen as much of that. They still really haven't had a dude that's done that since Chase Young. Like, like they had the Boses and they had Young, and it just kind of seemed like it was going to be this assembly line of guys, and they haven't really had that since Chase left. So I think that the D-line overall is solid, even good, but I wouldn't say great. Obviously, the secondary, I think, is phenomenal. But the middle of the field, like the linebackers, like they're fine. Like I didn't see like anything special there. I mean, we saw Jack Belling running through that part of the field before he fumbled. So I do think that offensively, though, and the way Chip Kelly is running this thing, I mean, he's got these dudes completely off balance. Like
that's not fair, man.
Yeah, I mean, we saw with the Jeremiah Smith rushing touchdown, where he has these 2 plays where he runs with Travion up the left side, does it again with Judkins, and it looks like it's going to be the exact same thing, and it winds up being a reverse coming around for a touchdown. It's all from the same formation, and you're like, man, how are you supposed to stop all of this? So you got all of these weapons with Smith and Ibuka, the running backs with Henderson and Judkins. Will Howard just, hey, don't screw this up.
Right.
Like, run when it's there. Take the sack if it's not, or throw away if it's not. Like, don't make the throw you did to Jordan Turner where there was two people over there and he winds up picking it off. Like, don't do that. But otherwise, they got so many weapons that they're going to be super hard to beat.
I mean, number 33, the backup comes in. What's Devin?
Yeah, Devin Brown.
And I'm sitting there in the stands for his one throw, and I was like, well, that was incomplete, right? Like, why is Smith celebrating? Why the refs got their hands up? Like,
right.
he didn't catch that. No, he caught that. Yeah. One hand stuck to him like super glue, like the old days of stick 'em. You may be too young for that one, but
no, I remember. Yeah,
that. And it's like, how did he catch it? That kid's Jeremiah Smith's gonna be a problem for the next 2.5 years in the Big Ten. That he's unguardable. Yep. He's one of those guys that every now and then you just come across an unguardable person. Now, that's one thing that Ohio State may not be able to get those defensive ends the way they used to, but first-round wide receivers, just when Marvin Harrison leaves, I mean, okay, Ibuka sticks around. Okay, he's going to be the man. Actually, pause that. He is the man, but he ain't the man because Jeremiah's going to be the man for the next couple of years. I mean,
and they got Carnell Tate too. Like, they got so many dudes. And I mean, since Ryan Day took over, like, if you think about all the first round dudes they've had, from like the Olaves, the Garrett Wilson, Smith and Jigba, Marv, and now you got Ibuka's gonna be first or second round pick, and then Jeremiah Smith in a couple of years are gonna join them. Like, it's crazy what they're doing down there. But luckily for Michigan State fans, you don't play Ohio State again until 2027. So that's the last time you're gonna see Jeremiah Smith in a Buckeye uniform, because he's only gonna be there 3 years and he's out of there.
I guess the only other, if you ever see him again, I guess that's a good thing. If you're an MSU fan, that means you made it to the championship game.
Right, exactly.
And you can live with that. So I want to go back to that Michigan-Minnesota game because it was funny. I see the kickoff, and I was actually watching the kickoff. I was in the Breslin Center watching the practice, and I was on my phone. I'm like, they really called that offside. Then you see the still shots, and it looks like the guy is not offside. And then I'm walking back after the Ohio State game with my producer, Evan, who's going to be cutting this pod up. Shout out to you, Evan. And I'm like, Evan, I think that, the Big Ten is going to admit they made a mistake without admitting they made a mistake because they're going to change the rule next year. They didn't wait. 48 hours later, hey, guys, new rules change. Don't ask us what was the genesis of this, but we're going to change the rules when it comes to kickoffs and onside. We're going to put some extra people right down the line to make sure this doesn't happen again. I guess for me, the biggest thing is, why not just use the technology that you have? If you can review whether you got your feet in, whether it was a catch, whether you broke the plane of the end zone, if you can do all of these things through replay, why not just use replay for an onside kick?
No, I agree. I'll never understand why there's some things that are reviewable and some things that aren't, especially now when you have these big replay centers and there's a bunch of people in there. At any given point, there should be, somebody buzzing to the ref like, hey, you should look at this. Or, controversial play, whatever the case is, like, actually, no, he wasn't offside. It's like, that should just be part of the protocol. I never understood why, you can look at certain things like, face mask. Oh, that's not a reviewable play. Well, why isn't it a reviewable play?
Oh, don't get me started on that.
Obviously we know with the Aiden Childs play, like, that's clearly a face mask. Like, that's something, it's super obvious. Like, why isn't that reviewable? I don't understand why all plays can't be reviewable. And I know people are probably worried about, pace of play and all that kind of stuff. But if you have the command center where all of these games are going on and you have multiple people looking at these different games, if it's a play like that and you miss the call, someone should be able to say, hey, you missed this call. This is a blatant face mask, or he's clearly not offsides. change the ruling of the play.
I'm with you because I think any fan will give up a minute to get a correct call.
Right.
Just look, you may not like it if it goes against your team, but it's the correct call. I've never understood that whole, the pace of the game. Once again, you buy a ticket, you turn on the game, this thing's going to be 3-some hours plus. Where were you going? You know that. If you need to get to the apple orchard, you know what? There's your keys. There's the door. There's your car. You can just leave. You don't have to keep watching this. I've never understood the whole, they need to speed the game up. Where are we going? Why are we in that big of a rush that we're willing to sacrifice calls like that? Because you're right. Holding is like balls and strikes in baseball. Okay. That's part of the human. It's holding on every play. If you did that, the game would never end. Right. But you're right. You can stop the play for targeting. If the refs blow a targeting call, they can call from the command center. Well, no, that was targeting. Go back and look at that. That I'm right. If you see it's a face mask, and the thing is, when you can see it so blatantly in 4K, it's like, guys, it's okay that you missed this call. I'm all for this because I think that they should. If you can do targeting, if you can do whether it was a catch or not, my God. How many times now do you wait to see if the process and did the ball move? And then you can't even feel good about a catch anymore until you see it in like 5 different angles. I don't understand why we don't do this because I do think that it would add credibility to the game.
Agree. And for all of the people who are worried about the whole pace of play thing, I've always said you should take 90 seconds to 2 minutes to review a play. And if you can't determine whether or not you should overturn it or not, then just stick with the call on the field. Like It should never be a replay that takes 5 or 6 minutes. Like you got all of the camera angles, you should be able to look through them, and in 2 minutes at the most, you should be able to make the decision. So that's one way to cut down on the whole, the pace of play. We can't review everything. The reviews should be pretty quick to begin with, and if it's not inconclusive after 2 minutes, then just stay with what's called. Otherwise, you should be able to figure out what's available and what's not, and if the call is right or if it's not right.
No, I'm with you, man. All right, finally, I do want to wrap this up because something that in the making, Big Ten and the SEC is talking about having crossover games in football. And it looks like the Big Ten is down for this. For me, I think this is a way that the two conferences realize, hey, we're the two big dogs, okay? We're going to make sure we eat first. If we do this, and we do this right, we will take up at least 66% of the college football playoff teams. You're going to get 4, and I'm going to get 4. We may even get 5 in there. Well, between the two conferences, you have 9 teams. But they want to play this crossover game. And I think the only hope, from what I read, the biggest sticking point is the SEC only plays 8 conference games. Big Ten plays 9. The Big Ten's like, okay, if you get up on our level, you play 9 conference games, we could do this. We'll each get 2 cupcake games. But just think about it. If you get like that Texas-Michigan game, that adds to your credibility. And even the loser can say, well, heck, we lost to the number 1 team in the country, so you can't count that against us.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I know the Big Ten and the Pac-12 tried to do this about 15 years ago, where they agreed to, the scheduling thing. I think it was in 2011, and it was supposed to start in 2017. But a similar sticking point at that point, the Big Ten had only played 8 conference games, and the Pac-12 had played 9. And a year later, the thing dissolved because they couldn't figure out the logistics, and the Big Ten didn't necessarily want to go to 9 games at the time, and the Pac-12 didn't want to change theirs. So I do wonder, if the SEC is fine with just the 8 games, and they're like, look, we got so many teams ranked in the top 10 as it is. Like, why would we give ourselves, harder schedule? Like, if I can continue to play 7, 8 home games, I can play that FCS opponent in November when everybody else is playing their big games. Like, why would I want to change that? But I do think the interesting part you talked about for the playoff, because they've been pushing for a 14-team playoff as well for 26. And I saw that there were a couple where you mentioned where SEC gets 4, Big Ten gets 4, and then we see what happens. And then there was another one where they even pushed for like a 3-3-2-2 where the Big Ten would get 3, the SEC gets 3, then the ACC gets 2, the Big 12 gets 2, the Group of 5 gets 1, and then there's 3 at larges. So I'll be curious to see where it falls, but they're
The funny thing
clearly
is,
throwing their weight around.
You already know where those at large is gonna go, Harold. They're
Right.
gonna go to
Notre Dame's gonna be 1, and then the other 2 will be Big Ten or SEC.
Right. So I look at it, even when they go to 14, you're gonna look at 5 and 5. You know, SEC is probably gonna bring 2, whoever's in their championship game. And then, you know, if Notre Dame is good, and then, you know, then the NCAA version of charity, where you allow a Group of 5 team in, like, all right, y'all gonna get your doors blown off, but this is our way of giving back to the community,
right.
saying
so
that you guys are relevant
this year or whatever. Hey,
right.
I got it.
Yeah, we're feeding the poor. Mm-hmm. Come on, come to the table.
All right.
Here's your swag bag, because that's all you're going home with, because you're not getting the W. So,
no.
So, do you think this is likely to happen?
I wouldn't be shocked. I think it would. I don't know about the scheduling part, but I wouldn't be shocked at all if they wind up getting the automatics where we're guaranteed to get 3 or 4. I'd be really surprised if that didn't happen. I think we'll know more in the year, because I know there were some conferences and Notre Dame who wanted to see the first year of the 12-team playoff play out. And then after that, I think they would reevaluate. So maybe if it's a situation where, you know, say Notre Dame's 12th because they lost to Northern Illinois and they didn't get in, they might be like, hey, wait, let's expand this to 14. And it's like, well, if you expanded to 14, all right, well, we got to get 3. And then, you know, over here got to get 3 or 4.
Can we just be smart about it and let's just take it to where it's 16 teams?
Yeah, I don't know why you would go to 14 instead of 16 at that point, but
right. Let's just go 16 teams. And honestly, the first round is on the first 8 seeds, you get home games.
Yep.
And then after that, you play use the bowl system.
Do the bowls. Yep. Exactly.
But I think that's an advantage, because I've often said, you know, what if you got Georgia up in Wisconsin, or you got Georgia in Spartan State, you got Georgia at the LSU at the big house. In December, that's a big advantage that you now possess.
Yeah, I would love to see a Ole Miss play at Penn State in December in a whiteout. Like, that would be amazing. Like, the temperature's going to be 10 degrees. I want to see what they do.
It's funny, because I think both of those coaches are the equivalent of it. They're the Spider-Man meme. Each coach just finds ways to lose games. So it's funny that you mentioned those two with James Franklin and Lane Kiffin, because both will let you down just when you want to start believing in them. That's just my own personal belief. You don't believe me? Look at the game that Ole Miss just played against Kentucky.
Yeah, that's a game.
James Franklin did his best this week to, you know what? Let's just keep going for it, James. We're not scoring in the red. But we kick some field goals. Nah, I got this. Anyway, I digress. Harold, appreciate your time, man. I do want to get you back on. We're going to work this out. I'll get you back on next week so we can sit and chop it up for, I guess would be, week 7 of the Big Ten. This is week 6. It's going to be over halfway over. Starting next week, man. Appreciate your time. Harold Shelton, Senior Research Manager from the Big Ten Network, kind enough to join us here on the 5-Star Zone. Keep liking, subscribing, telling your friends. I'm your host, Rico Beard. We'll be back next week. Harold's going to be joining us. He doesn't even know it yet, but he will be back. I'll see you then.